This episode is brought to you by Google Gemini. With the Gemini app, you can talk live and have a real-time conversation with an AI assistant. It's great for all kinds of things, like if you want to practice for an upcoming interview, ask for advice on things to do in a new city, or brainstorm creative ideas. And by the way, this script was actually read by Gemini. Download the Gemini app for iOS and Android today. Must be 18 plus to use Gemini Live.
This episode is brought to you by Disney's Mufasa, The Lion King. Get tickets now for the ultimate family holiday movie experience. Reunite with the characters you know and the untold story you'd never expect. Witness Mufasa's rise from orphan to king and see how the legendary villain Scar got his name. Disney's Mufasa, The Lion King. In theaters everywhere this Friday. The kingdom awaits.
I'm Julia Turner, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest Ted Danson Gumshoe Grandpa Edition. It's Wednesday, December 18th, 2024, and today we are talking about Man on the Inside, the new Netflix show starring Ted Danson as a widower who goes undercover at a retirement home to help ferret out a jewel thief. Then, The Seed of the Sacred Fig, a domestic drama about the rights and rebellions of Iran's daughters, made in secret by director Mohammad Rasoulof, who's now in exile in Europe. And finally, the rise of the creator as a dominant cultural force. We'll talk about a new essay from The New Yorker's Kyle Chayka and about Talk Tuah, the newish podcast from Haliey Welch, who became famous this summer describing a sex act with winsome gusto, and which was at one point the fifth most popular podcast on Spotify, above The Daily, although it has now fallen out of the top 100. Joining me today is Steve Metcalf. Hello, Steve. How you doing?
I get laid low pretty easily, so, always take news like this with a grain of salt, but I got laid like effing low over the weekend by a combo platter of head and stomach, which can only mean norovirus. So I want the whole, they didn't only make one world's tiniest violin, they made a lot of them. So I want the string section.
Okay. All right. I hope you feel better. I'm sorry.
The world's tiniest double bass.
I'll play a regular size violin. Being sick stinks. Thank you for being here. And also Slate film critic Dana Stevens. Hello, Dana.
Hey. I, on the other hand, am in my usual ubermensch health.
Sturdy, stoic. Blood coursing through her veins with gusto. All right. Well,
win some gusto.
Win some gusto all around. All right. Man on the Inside is the latest show from Mike Schur, the creator of Parks and Recreation and The Good Place, and it demonstrates both Schur's cozy, quirky humor, his eye for the ensemble, and his interest in philosophical questions about how to live a good life. In the show, Danson plays lonely widower Charles, who answers a classified ad and signs on to work for a private investigator who's been hired to find a jewel thief in a retirement community. Once he arrives, he finds connection and kinship with the varied bunch of residents, played by a charming ensemble of actors including Sally Struthers and Stephen McKinley Henderson. In this clip, we hear Danson's Charles in conversation with Lila Rich Creek Estrada's Julie, the PI who hired him. They're catching up after Charles's wild first night on the inside.
Hey, Charles. When I said to lay low, what did that mean to you exactly?
I did lay low. I met a ton of people, but I was very discreet, blended right in.
There's an entire pizza stuck to your back.
Oh. Thank God, I'm starving.
Oh.
So, I do have a report. Smoked a little grass last night. Just to be part of the group. Would have been suspicious if I didn't.
I'm sorry, is that your report?
Yeah.
All right. Steve, I'm going to start with you. What did you make of this cozy mystery?
Always a good time when we can't get through the clip without laughing. Was it that funny throughout? I don't think it was. But there's a lot to really like and admire here, beginning with the double entendre of the title, who these days is actually a man on the inside, regardless of what chronological or biological age they've reached. Almost nobody. So there's something really comforting about a man of a certain age Danson himself, I believe, is in his mid-70s. The character seems to be roughly that age, who is tall, looks beautiful in a suit, beautifully turned out. I mean, I don't think anyone has ever made me want to be 6'2" more than Ted Danson. He's been doing that to me for 40 years now. I'm obviously, like most of us, a huge fan of his work since Cheers and Body Heat. Just what a wonderful presence on American screens. But I love that double entendre. Like, this man is in many ways a genuine man on the inside, which means that his most basic instincts are chivalrous. They're tender and kind. He's bereft. I think it's a show about obviously aging and loneliness in ways that I, by and large, respect and take seriously. I laughed every time I saw his grandsons, the rapport there and the verisimilitude of these three not yet men on the inside is absolutely hilarious. I think I had to Google to remember what the title of the Ted Lasso show was. I was like, COVID era soccer com. It has a little bit of that. It's timely, I think. It's timed beautifully for the men children now taking over the world, including America. It's a counter-programming to that, which is enormously comforting. And I like a show that addresses the fact that we make old people disappear into either literally by warehousing them, right, which the show is a little bit about, or quite a lot about, or by ignoring them when they're right in front of us, or worse, turning them into cutesy pie caricatures. And here's where I think the show is interesting to talk about critically. Whether or not it does that, I mean, it's created by Mike Schur, who's an enormously gifted and subtle sitcom auteur. So it doesn't do it, when it does do it, it doesn't do it egregiously. But I just wondered whether people felt as though some of the caricaturing ran a little bit against the overall theme of the show. That said, I watched the entire run of it. It was also perfect accompaniment to lying on a sofa in viral misery. I'm just curious what others made of it, because I felt as though a part of me was highly inclined to inflate it, but I think most of that inclination came from the charms of the show and especially its lead.
Yeah, that was so sweet, Steve, that I feel really bad cutting down your beloved viral. I can completely see how this would get a person through a sick week, because it is a comfort watch. It is designed to be a comfort watch. I went into it wanting exactly that and feeling like, hey, the combination of the guy who made The Good Place back with Ted Danson again, with this really fun premise about implanting a mole into an old folks home. This is going to be, at the very least, lots of fun. And going into it with all goodwill and really trying I watched the entire thing. I tried up until about episode 5 to feel good about it. But I think it does a lot of the things that you just said you think it avoids doing. I think it does make the old characters cutesy pie, with the exception of Ted Danson. I feel like there are 2 characters that have any degree of character development or complexity in this show. And one of them doesn't enter the show until nearly the end. One is Ted Danson's character. And the other is his friend at the home, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson, who they go on these outings and see baseball games together. And sort of these 2 lonely old guys make this connection. That's a really great arc in the show. It doesn't kick in until about episode 4.5 of 8. I really don't understand how this show is structured at all, because I feel like there's so much kind of gooey downtime where the mystery isn't being advanced, the characters aren't being developed. There's just so much kind of slack action centered around this retirement community that doesn't take anything anywhere, and has a lot of, I think, especially the female characters at the home are shown as these kind of quirky old ladies. And isn't it so funny that they, have these, I don't know, that they buy things on QVC or whatever. I felt like I'm not sure anyone does actually buy things on QVC, but it was sort of that level of old person stereotype. Like, it's these sweet, gullible old people. I don't know. I felt quite angry at the show by the end, because I didn't think it was doing justice to its senior characters. And then this is a less lofty thing to critique it about, but the mystery just was so dumb. It didn't make any sense. And the character I really couldn't stand was someone that you hear in that clip, the private investigator who hires him and sends him on this journey. She was just a terrible character. Nothing against the actress playing her, but why was she this solo sort of young, telegenic woman running this apparently quite upscale private investigation agency all by herself that appeared to have no other cases than this utterly bizarre case of putting this guy in this retirement community. I don't know. I would think that the creator of The Good Place could create a strange, quirky world with its own bizarre rules where that would make sense. But in order to do that, the PI character has to have a little texture and history and actual character. We know nothing about her life outside of private investigation. We don't really know about her relationship with Ted Danson outside of, her attempt to advance this ridiculous case about the jewel theft in the community. So all of these things that I thought could have been part of, building out a universe, Good Place style, that had its own consistent rules, as silly as they were, and made you care about the solving of the mystery, never really unfolded.
Yeah, I think I probably come down somewhere in the middle. It's true that Steve McKinley Henderson and Ted Danson both appear to be acting and registering and embodying their characters on a deeper plane than some of the rest of the characters, even though I think one of the real strengths of the show is just the collection of marvelous actors who are playing these roles, some of which are more fully and realistically sketched out than others. But Sally Struthers plays kind of the local hussy, but she turns out to be sort of lovely and wise in her own way. Margaret Avery has a great turn. There's just, a lot of meat for actors whose careers in their later life maybe haven't been as robust as Ted Danson and honestly Stephen McKinley Henderson, who's pretty, pops up prominently in prominent things all the time. So I like that about it. I mean, it's interesting to think about the last two major shows, right? Parks and Recreation was in a kind of heightened reality, real world that was almost like a live action Simpsons or something. There was sort of a goofy specificity to this fake Midwestern town and its funny rivalries with its other town and these very particular characters within the ensemble. And then The Good Place obviously takes place in kind of a ungrounded philosophical, like meta space. And it's obviously about how people conduct themselves in the real world. But I wonder if that sort of airy gauziness, if some of the lack of grounding that you're describing, particularly in that PI character, which I agree she's sort of the weakest part of the show, maybe it just needs to come back down to earth. And it was announced this week that it's been picked up for a second season. So there will be more of the show and more opportunity to round it out. I think I was inclined to, Schur has been on the record talking about the loss of the classic network sitcom in terms of a show that has truly 22 episodes across a season to introduce you to its world and its characters and develop its conflicts and themes and find the rhythms that might allow it to tell stories of growth and change among its characters. And I think that's interesting to keep in mind looking at this 8-episode series. Like there are so many characters and threads here. The shows are longish 30 minutes. They're sort of longer than a network sitcom, but not that much longer. And I feel like I'm rooting for this show. I don't know. I think I land closer to Steve than to you, Dana, even though I was not sick this weekend. I don't think it was quite as funny as some of those other shows or as brilliantly mischievous. Those Good Place twists from the first season are stunning. Parks and Rec, once it got going, could make you laugh like nothing else. But Parks and Rec, remember, had that whole funny, pokey first season that was all about those characters who disappear. It took a minute to find its rhythm, and I wonder if that's sort of what we're seeing here. And for me, Ted Danson is just such a gem, and it's not a surprising point to make, but it's so fun to watch. How is it that he's so funny and charming, and the particulars of his art as a performer who captivates us and who we empathize with? It's just fun to see. So I don't know. The other performance we haven't mentioned is Stephanie Beatriz, who played a very, very different character in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, another Schur show, and she has a really different role here. And I think there's one episode that really features her perspective that I know you had strong feelings about, Steve. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that. She plays Dee Dee, who runs the facility.
That's exactly where I was going to go next, Julia, is that I agree that the PI, young woman PI, who hires Ted Danson to be the man on the inside is a somewhat empty character, really written character right now. I think that that's totally compensated for in the fullness of Dee Dee, the person who runs this community. And the performance by Stephanie Beatrice is amazing. And if you are inclined to keep going with the show, right, you find it charming enough, and Danson's this miracle of underplayed, actorly aplomb. Episode 6, I thought, was superb television. I think it is tightly written, beautifully paced, laugh out loud funny throughout, which none of the others are, and really heartrending and lands on a kind of genuinely moving note. And it features her most heavily, uncoincidentally, Dee Dee. And I just had to write down the name of the person who wrote it. Karen Chi, turns out, is a 29-year-old Harvard grad. And she just delivered a perfect sitcom episode. So whatever else is going on with the future of the show, I hope she's really central to it. The other thing I was going to say is, Julia, I love the point you made that jumped out at me too about what Mike Schur said about the classic 22, 24 episode sitcom that ran for years and years and years, which is that because the business model involves syndication, they had to be standalone. Eventually, these were going to be shown in reruns, and you had to be able to catch one without any context in order to watch it and appreciate it. So in that sense, there was no plotted arc the way streaming allows you to have, where you begin binging, you watch 8 episodes, it tells a story. But there was this implicit story of all the actors, all the writers, all the producers, all the directors deepening into the universe over time, and actors just becoming the person that they're playing, right, in some deep sense, because they're doing it over and over and over again. And so you could watch an episode from season 1, an episode from season 3, and they might have very tangential plot connections, but you would have witnessed an implicit story arc in how the character's written, how the character's being played. And that is absent. Now, whether you can recreate it in the context of Netflix and streaming, it's hard to know. And then there's a second primary female character who I think is exceedingly well written, which is and played, which is his daughter, who's forced to pretend that she's his niece in order to go along with the cover story. Her household is where these 3 grandsons live and where much of the laugh out loud hilarity happens. I think she's a terrific character. I actually found that relationship quite moving and quite real in some sense. So I'm very on board for season 2. My strong suspicion is because of Schur and Ted Danson that this is an appetizer and the show turns into something accomplished.
I will say those scenes with the 3 teen sons are fabulous. And I think part of what makes Schur's work so great is just his interest in how we live now. Like, he's very interested in how we live now, which is what makes me interested in following him further into where old people go and what we do with them. And similarly, I don't think I've yet seen on screen the actual dynamic of a family. Like, it would be boring to show what actually happens in a family, which is the teenagers are often just on their phones. I went to a bar mitzvah this summer where truly after 4 minutes of party, just 40 boys all sat in the same room looking at their phones. And apparently they were playing a game with each other on some of them, but it was just the sort of like complete absence of social interaction. The way that those characters are drawn is hilarious. And then they prove actually to be sweet little humans underneath their screens. And they also refer to their parents as bro all the time. It's like a little bit, you can see the glimmer of like the true laugh out loud coming back to life. So I'm glad you flagged those because I love those moments too. All right. Well, the show is Man on the Inside. We are mixed upon it. Dana finds it a treacly caricature. Steve finds it a charming bath. I'm, I think, along for the ride for season 2, just because I have so much trust in the people behind it. It's on Netflix. Check it out.
It's great when you can get someone a gift they wouldn't necessarily get for themselves. That little bit of luxury that they don't know they're missing. For quality gifts at an affordable price, the go-to is Quince. Quince is a source for clothing that lets you enjoy everyday luxury. I think of them as my silk and cashmere place, right? Those kind of materials that you don't usually shop for because they tend to have such high price points. They have beautiful designs using those and other luxury fabrics at very affordable prices. Steve, I hear you just got something new from Quince. Can you describe your latest haul?
That is true. The loved one for whom I bought a gift from Quince was me. I needed a very light, wearable pants to take with me to Australia, to which I'm traveling with my family any day now. So I bought a pair of organic cotton Cool Max chinos in true black. What is better than the super light black chino, right? It can be worn, cool weather, but it warms up a little bit. It's black. It's absorbing the sun. You can wear it at night. It's relaxed. I just love this pair of pants. It's arrived. I've tried it on. It's everything I dream.
Nice. That does sound like a perfect travel item, Steve. And I'm very jealous, not just of your pants, but of the fact you get to go to Australia. Gift luxury this holiday season without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/culture for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/culture to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/culture.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little money there, hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
The Seed of the Sacred Fig, released here in the United States by Neon, is the latest film from Iranian director Mohammad Rasoulof, who made the movie in secret and fled Iran in a harrowing mountain trek detailed in the New York Times before the film's completion and release. The movie centers on a nuclear family living through the women life freedom protest movement that arose in Iran in 2022. That was prompted, of course, by the death of Mahsa Amini, who'd been arrested and then died in police custody after failing to wear her hijab correctly. The father, Iman, played by Misag Zara, has been promoted to investigating judge, a job that requires him to rubber stamp the verdicts of the authoritarian regime and puts his family under a microscope. His wife, Najma, played by Sohila Golestani, is excited about the promotion and the nicer apartment that may come with it. Daughters Revzan and Sana, played by Masa Rostami and Satara Maleki, aren't sure what to make of their father's new role as they begin to watch women advocating for themselves and being brutalized in the streets, shown here in the film in documentary shots that are interspersed with the rest of the filmmaking. Then Iman's gun goes missing, and he turns, first on his daughters and then on his wife. The clip we have here is, of course, in Persian, but we're going to play a little bit of it so you can hear the tone of the film. Iman and Najma have just shared word of his promotion with their daughters, and Najma explains that their behavior going forward must be irreproachable.
امنیت اونجا بیشتره از کل شهرک محافظت میشه.
ولی یه نکاتی هست که باید خیلی بیشتر از قبل رعایت کنید چون ممکنه واسه باباتون بد بشه. مثلا چی؟ مثلا رعایت حجاب. باید حواستون باشه یه وقت عکسی چیزی از خودتون تو مجازی نذارین. خیلی مهمه جلوی بقیه رعایت بکنین. الان اونجا یه عده منتظرن ببینن شما چیکار میکنین، سریع برن گزارش بدن. بعد بدونین کجا چجوری رفتار کنین، کجا برین، کجا نرین، چی بپوشین، چی نپوشین، با کی دوستی بکنین، چی بگین، چی نگین.
You know, last week I was compiling my top 10 of the year list, and this movie actually was on it at one point and then got bumped down to the runners-up list where it still appears, simply because I think I decided that there were other movies this year that I either felt more passionate about or that sort of more perfectly executed what they tried to do. But the fact it was in the running and only got bumped off at the last minute, I think goes to say that I really admired this movie a lot and would definitely enthusiastically send people to it. I mean, the story behind it is a huge part of what makes the movie fascinating, and not just in the sense that, you know, you've got to read this article about Mohammad Rasoulof before you appreciate the movie, but in the sense that sense of urgency and the sense of, you know, a need to possibly go undercover or flee is built into the movie itself. And one of the things that the movie does quite effectively is build in this cell phone footage from the real life women life freedom movement and the street riots in in Iran, which frequently ended in violent altercations with cops, which you also see here. So the interpolation of those moments, into the fictional story as if they were cell phone footage being shot by the characters or people the characters know, is a really, really powerful element in the film and gives you a sense that, this is a living document, as does the fact that this was sort of shot secretly on the streets and is basically a guerrilla movie made against the wishes of the regime. All of that said, none of those things would matter if the story itself as a piece of drama didn't actually work. And I think it really, really does. There's a big shift in tone in this movie as it goes from moving somewhat slowly at the beginning. You have to have some patience as all the characters and pieces are put into place for this family story, to really being a suspenseful thriller at the end. And we won't spoil anything, but I mean, it ends as a movie that would have been much larger in scope. A sort of political thriller might have ended, even though it starts out in a small domestic space. And yeah, I mean, the performances have this plucked from the street quality. I'm assuming that these are professional actors, but they have, in a way, the kind of rawness and freshness of people that are acting for the first time in some cases. That also means that there's some unevenness in the performances. Some of them seem more professional and polished than others. That's not always perfectly integrated, but that's a lot to ask of somebody who is literally shooting a movie in secret at, hiding out from a theocratic dictatorship. I don't know. I'm very curious to hear what both of you feel, but I was basically thrilled by this movie, even though there are some things which maybe we'll get to later, some things about the ending that didn't quite ring true to me.
Oh, this is firmly in my top, not only 10, but probably 3, maybe, or 4 movies of the year. And I felt it was a strong year for movies. So there was a lot of competition. I mean, I haven't seen his other films. I'm embarrassed to say I now very badly want to go back and watch them. Of course, the very obvious and maybe even slightly facile comparison are the movies of Asghar Farhadi, who made A Separation, one of my favorite movies of the last 20 years. Another Iranian filmmaker, and what they have in common, obviously, is they're attempting to understand living in the 21st century in a medieval theocracy simultaneously, and what that does to the psyche and social fabric of Iran. This movie, as with Farhadi's, they're just non-decadent in the extreme. They're being made under circumstances in which a certain kind of over-aestheticization, even a hint of nihilism or a kind of decadent self-celebration is just completely beyond consideration. It's not even epistemically possible to imagine that would be what you would devote your serious filmmaking energies to. Nonetheless, the movies aren't dogmatic or humorless or or anti-aesthetic in any respect. They're actually quite beautiful films. This film in particular, how far it takes you into the rhythms, how deep into the rhythms of that particular household, its soul and its psyche, to me, are extraordinary in many respects. It's a totally typical bourgeois household. You've got a kind of quasi-authoritarian, but not at all caricatured father figure, 2 teenage girls with iPhones, and the inevitable generational conflict. Social media and the iPhone are central to this movie. They're propelling the revolution that's happening outside this nuclear unit's doors. And the film, in many respects, is about a new generation raised within a theocracy. A quote from the director really struck my eye. Before prison, he has a lot of experience with Iranian interrogators in prisons. Before those kinds of characters, he means like the father, were abstract and imaginary. When I met them and spent time with them in there, I got to know who they were and how they tell their stories. This is absolutely that movie. The father figure in this movie had status, rising status, and authority, the true authority, the authority to make what he believed were judicious decisions. And a turning point isn't only that he gets this fancier new job, it's that he has rising status and no authority. He is basically informed, to his shock, that he is now a rubber stamp. And the reasons why he accepts that are kind of made plain throughout the course of the movie. He comes from a very humble background. He genuinely loves his family. He's not a cartoon familial autocrat, domestic, space sphere autocrat at all. He's, I think, in many ways, a deeply thoughtful and tender father. And he doesn't live in a society, as depicted here, where relinquishing his careerism for the heroic stand is a possibility. And so he decides near the beginning of the film to live this contradiction in order to keep his family safe. You've been brought into a nuclear unit that is totally relatable and it's kind of lovable. The mother's a good mother. I mean, nobody in this film is a perfect person. It's a very real film. The mother's loving, dutiful, deeply respectful in her way of her daughters. And the other thing that I would say is that Justin Chang, a critic, I really, really admire Justin Chang. He's one of my favorite film critics, along with you, Dana, and he's a wonderful human being. He said something that really surprised me because I really disagree with it, which is he thought it was maybe an error that we don't see more of the father's work after he becomes a compromised figure. I totally disagree with that. This is a movie about compartmentalization and about compartmentalization becoming impossible and breaking down. It's the source of the tragedy of the film. And the fact is we get nothing of the real interior of his hands-on work, the actual work of doing these interrogations during the protests, which are going to send many people to jail indefinitely and maybe to the gallows for all we know, until we get, and I won't spoil it, a genuinely chilling scene with a friend and colleague of his later in the film. And the fact that you had to wait for that moment to get a taste of at least part of what, and it's almost certainly a modest taste of what goes on in these interrogation rooms and what that means in a more pervasive sense, right? The point of the panopticon is to make you feel as though you're being watched even when you aren't. And I just thought this was a brilliant and heartbreaking movie. Its imperfection comes at the end. I believe that sort of something of a genre shift was kind of didn't really work for me exactly, but I didn't care. The whole is so much greater than the sum of its parts. I think it's really an urgent film for people to see and a beautifully realized film.
With you, Steve, I really loved this movie. And I think and I also really loved what happened to it tonally at the end. I think I have qualms about the final shot, which is hokey and cornball in a way that the rest of the movie isn't. But up till there, it had me, because I think you're right that the film is about compartmentalization, and it's also about compromise with autocracy, right? And so, okay, sure, you've got this job. What's the job doing? I don't know. It's going to mean better, safer life for us. Like, that is a very human impulse, right? And then the daughters, it's a basically loving family. They basically love their mom and dad. They've had a nice life. They all want to get along and for it to go well. And the rise on the streets of speech and protest and freedom forces the daughters to think about what they want and who they are and what their life is, and in turn forces the mother to think about what she's compartmentalized and where she's compromised. There's an early scene where one of the girl's friends, who is the mother kind of dismisses and is trying to shoo out of the house as a bad influence, gets caught up in the violence in the streets and gets injured. That sort of begins to pull the mother into thinking a little bit more about these issues. And then the father, who seems mostly like a benevolent, if not particularly brave figure for the beginning of the film, essentially we watch him lose his mind and lose his capacity for love and respect and connection through fear. And so, although becomes a villain, I found him to be, it's not a sympathetic villain, but I think the movie is nearly 3 hours. It is not it's not a thrill ride. So you do have to kind of know what you're in for going in. It's methodical in how it sets it up. But to me, all of that method and work to help you understand how he would get to where he gets at the end of the film really worked, and sort of what the family suddenly finds themselves all kind of complicit in and participating in, and then how they end up interacting with each other, I thought was just sort of shocking and full of dread and horror and beauty. And then the film kind of gets more and more dreamlike in its final sequence, all of which basically I think works beautifully up to there's just one last shot that I didn't think quite landed. But just the bravery of making this movie and the contemporary portrait of personal and political in Iran is makes it worth seeing on 1,000 levels, I think. Dana, I'm curious what you said about the performances. I found all of the performances to be pretty great. Was there one that didn't resonate with you?
It's not the kind of movie that you feel very charitable saying this about the performances, because like every person is really bringing it. I feel like because she's such a central character, I wish the mother's performance, and this may not just be the performance, but a little bit the writing of the character. I wish that the mother had had more notes to explore besides, maternal concern. Like every other character, the father obviously has a huge shift over the course of the story. The daughters also feel like these complex characters that you're always getting to know more about, and that they still have secrets at the end. And I think that the mother's performance, who is in a way the main character of the story, is a little bit one note. And again, I think that may have to do with, I don't know, the perception of maternity and femininity and womanhood in the movie and in Iran. I'm not sure exactly what to attribute it to, but I think that I would like to know a little bit more about her emotions besides worry and maternal care. I would like to see more of her anger, her self-doubt, things like that. I would also say, Julia, that I would maybe extend your comment about the cheesy last shot to a little bit more of the ending. I would say that maybe the last 5 to 10 minutes where we find ourselves in an action thriller don't quite seem to rhyme with the rest of the movie, even though I appreciate that, in fact, that is the direction the movie was always going. I think if it had pulled back, if it had ramped back a little bit on the genre elements in the final sequence, it might have ended more powerfully.
The other thing I would say is that it's just as a concluding thought for me is that it is like the other Iranian movies that I've seen, it is successfully delivered tragedy in the sense that you do not feel as though, if only the father were slightly less autocratic, if only the mother were slightly more indulgent of her daughter's need to grow beyond what the possibilities of her life were. These are imposing highly American-centric paradigms on a situation in which no actor possesses the freedom of self-development and moral choice in those kinds of ways. And so in that sense, bringing you to that action thriller, you do sort of see why you end up with all of the tragedy rising to the surface and expressing itself as villainous and victimized roles that nobody wanted, and so exceeded by the actual dimensions of their humanity. In that sense, I do think the ending works conceptually with the rest of the film, but it just is a little hard to get one's head around in the moment, maybe.
All right. Well, the film is The Seed of the Sacred Fig. It's out in limited release right now from Neon, presumably going wider, and presumably it will be part of the Oscar conversation as the months continue. So hopefully you can find a time and place to check it out.
It's always fun to dive into the latest rumors like who's dating who will be on the next season of our favorite show. Well, here's one rumor to squash the idea that Discover isn't widely accepted. The truth is, Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. That means it's accepted basically anywhere across the country. Don't pay attention to every rumor out there. But remember, it does pay to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
Audible's best of 2024 picks are here. Discover the year's top audiobooks, podcasts, and originals in all your favorite genres. From memoirs and sci-fi to mysteries and thrillers, from romance and well-being to fiction, Audible's carefully curated list in every category is the best way to hear 2024's best of the year in audio entertainment, like the star-studded production of George Orwell's 1984, which both honors and reinvigorates the terrifying classic. It's one of the best original dramatizations out there. Or romance that hits the spot like Emily Henry's Funny Story, heartfelt memoirs like Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's Lovely One. Listen to the year's best fiction like The Women by Kristen Hanna and Percival Everett's brilliantly subversive James. Audible. There's more to imagine when you listen. Go to audible.com/culture and discover all the year's best waiting for you.
For our final segment, we are talking about a new article from New Yorker writer Kyle Chayka, who recently declared 2024 the year creators took over. He begins with the tale of the Hawk Tuah girl who parlayed her internet fame into a podcast, throwing out the first pitch at a Mets game, and a cryptocurrency meme coin that collapsed last week and cost its early adopters a lot of money. Chayka describes the shift away from influencer as the term to describe this type of character in American life. These days, he writes, the favored term for an internet powerhouse is creator. And in the course of this year, a threshold of creatordom was passed. We don't talk so much about podcasters, musicians, authors, or pundits anymore. They are simply creators, a catch-all for people who are famous for making stuff across any number of platforms. What do creators create exactly? Above all, they create digital content, and it doesn't much matter where or which kind. They create the YouTube and TikTok videos we watch. They create the newsletters we read and the podcasts we listen to. They create bits of text we consume on X Threads or Blue Sky. Most likely, they do all of the above at the same time. The attention economy has dominated the internet for more than a decade now, but never before have its protagonists felt so central to American life or had such direct access to the levers of power. And then a little later on in the piece, he writes, in the creator era, who you are is more important than what precisely you do or make, in part because what you make is always changing as digital platforms evolve. Let's start a little bit by talking about this thesis, and then we'll move on to the putative charms of the Tuah girl. What did you think, Dana? Are you persuaded that this has been the year of the creator and that the creator is a significantly different thing than an influencer?
Yeah, I mean, both of the worlds, the creator and influencer distinction, is about two different worlds that I don't feel any part of, not being on TikTok. I won't say not any part of, but that I have to wait for them to trickle down to the next level from their kind of the place that they're made to be experienced. So I'm going to have to take Kyle Chayka's word for it that this is the year that distinction became important. But I think he lays it out clearly enough that I think he must be right. There's a wonderful piece in Defector as well by Patrick Redford, kind of separately tracing this same trajectory, from basically going viral for saying something dirty in an interview on TikTok to, having your own podcast, having your own meme coin, this sort of new path to celebrity and to at least brief attention. And that distinction seems to be meaningful to me in the sense that there's as both of these writers lay out in different ways, it just seems like appropriately enough in the era of Trump, there is a much more shameless and bald kind of grab for attention and as much sort of money and virality as you can get in a brief space of time than there might have been in an earlier period when the idea of an influencer was something that developed over time, that you would build a following, you would lay the groundwork. This is sounding like I'm making a value comparison, and I'm not trying to, because both actually strike me as somewhat disturbingly empty ways to build one's life and livelihood. But I guess the old influencer method would sort of be, I'm reaching out, I'm getting the largest following I can, I'm making my brand and building my reputation, as this person who, whatever, does box opening videos on YouTube or whatever your thing is. But for someone like the Tuah girl, who we'll get into more specifically, I hope, in a minute, who that is and why she became viral, it's more the case that you just simply surf your fame for as long as you can, from whatever means you can get it, and you crash and burn. For example, the cryptocurrency that the Tuah girl started in her name, immediately after going viral, which I believe took one day to crash and burn, but presumably during that day, she either made some money or gained some attention or, got the right to make her own podcast. It just seems, in short, like there's a really feverishly short window now in which you can make that fame grab, and that in the larger economy, people are being applauded just simply for doing that, right? I mean, the Tuah girl isn't even Paris Hilton, who was famous for being famous or famous for being the daughter of a famous rich man. She's just someone who was openly out there making her grab for the bag, as Patrick Redford puts it in his Defector piece, getting it and being applauded for that very grasping.
I think Dana's onto something, which is what does the world look like when... So creator, I think, presupposes an almost total absence, really in some ways radical absence of gatekeeping or mediators, right? So I think the word and what it signifies, creator, what it signifies is the total, utter, radical collapse of gatekeeping and mediating in the digital sphere. The Tuah girl was approached. The origin of the whole phenomenon is a very young woman in her early 20s, blonde, traditionally conceived, attractive, young blonde woman. She was walking with friends, appeared to be outside of some kind of event, and a couple of candid on the street interviewers, themselves going for the digital bag, asked her to say something salacious, like what is like a turn on in bed or something. And she just, I have to admit, she rolled with it in the moment with an incredible humor. And she basically says, she describes an act that I tried explaining this to my two older friends last night.
What's one move in bed that makes a man go crazy every time?
Oh, you gotta give him that hawk too and spit on that thing. You get me?
And I was laughing really hard at the combination of utter salacity and innocence of it in a way. The way she describes what to me is a really graphic, act relating to like oral sex, right? Involving spitting, like hawk Tuah. The way she describes it, it's incredibly funny. She rolls with the moment. She's not being herself salacious nor prudish. She's just twinkling and rolling with it. And it was kind of great. Like, I think it deserved to go viral in this insane way. At that moment, she's being herself. And in the subsequent moments, in this creator phase, quote unquote creator phase, she's almost entirely a passive vessel for a bunch of people who move in and attempt to create content in a larger sense. And it seems to have crashed and burned. The podcast was a huge hit immediately and then kind of disappeared.
I mean, I think it's disappeared to a level of middling success. It's not like it's...
Fair enough. And I'm very curious to hear you speak to this, Julia. It's really hard not to have that part of you that grew up in a pre-digital era wonder about this combination of zero gatekeeping and a frenzy of self-monetization as kind of the only socially acceptable pursuit or even avenue of possibility to something other than anonymity and a pseudo career, a gig work career, and just the word that I keep thinking about is, okay, yeah, authorship, and maybe it's dead and the Gutenberg revolution is over. Okay, it's fucking heartbreaking. I'm going to continue to read books. But the word is just basic aspiration. Like there's something kind of gone and you feel like a fuddy-duddy saying it, but the aspiration to do something other than grab the bag.
Well, I don't know. So we should stipulate this is like a year-end review segment. Obviously, the Hawk Tuah Girls moment came in late summer, and then the rise of her podcast and monetization was early fall, and then the meme coin thing happened last week. So we're coming in at the end of the cycle. And I had heard about this girl, but had not gone and seen the original video, listened to any of her stuff, didn't particularly seem up my alley. And I spent a couple hours with her podcast this weekend, and she's so charming. She's like incredibly charming. She's not the kind of person who would have gotten a platform in most walks of American life for the 21st century. She is the kind of person who might have gotten famous on a reality show. Like if you think about like the Snookies of Jersey Shore or the kind of American specimens who would not have found fame through their like thespian talent or sheer physical beauty as a model, or kind of, I don't know, intelligence and authority as some kind of, or putative intelligence and authority as some kind of televised talking head, right? Like there would not have been an avenue for her charm and charisma to have reached a wider audience than her own community prior to the dawn of social media. And yeah, there is. And that is a fact of American life that strikes me as having like both positive and negative implications. Like the fact that more people can try to figure out how to capitalize on their own ideas and charisma with a much broader, without as many gatekeepers, I think is kind of interesting and good. Like this girl from this rural town outside Nashville has kind of connected with people all over the world, made the show. It may or may not be an enduring success. The defector piece that you cite, which is also good and worth reading, Dana, is sort of decrying the idea that instead of being annoyed that characters like this sometimes come for the money and cash out fast, that we all kind of root for it. Like, life is wild. I don't know, girl, get yours and go home. It's fine. And I agree that there's something maybe sad and nihilistic about that, but I also kind of get it. I don't know. Here's this girl who becomes the center of a internet maelstrom, and she's able to do more with it than she would have been if she had just been, I don't know, a viral freak of 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. The kind of autonomy and authority of that is interesting. And I don't know, I found it sort of interesting to spend some time in the company of this woman and various other internet people, even if it wasn't exactly, there was a portion where she was talking to Whitney Cummings and they were both decrying history and how lame and stupid it is. And I was like, this isn't a show for me exactly, but okay. So the kind of democratization of who can come to our attention and exercise their charisma on a broader platform. And I think it's like not coincidental that Riz and charisma is this like viral phrase this year of like the thing that means you have clout and power. Like that mystery magnetism is more valuable than maybe it's ever been right now, because you can magnetize audiences to yourself no matter who or where you are if the various internet cards fall correctly. It's just an interesting moment for that. And I'm not sure I totally understand the difference between an influencer and a creator. I mean, the point that Chayka makes about you have to figure out how to do what you do across multiple platforms, like that describes my life as an editor for the last 20 years. It's like when I was at Slate, it was like, okay, how do we do what Slate does, which is offer insightful and surprising analysis of the world in whatever format is happening right now? Is it the aggregation internet? Is it the SEO internet? Is it the Facebook macro image internet? Is it the social video internet? Like figuring out how to do what you do nimbly across different digital platforms as they change and digital formats as they change. Like that's just life making stuff right now if you're making stuff online. So that definition didn't seem as, the output didn't seem as relevant as the gatekeeper question, Steve. And I think I find myself in the funny position of being a literal gatekeeper professionally who's sort of sympathetic to or excited about the idea of the end of gatekeeping.
Can I just say quickly that the word democratization is the one that really sticks with me in what you said, Julia, because this is what democratization is once you've withdrawn funding from public institutions and public education. University is now unaffordably expensive. You've broken the social contract with young people. Homes are unaffordable, and the drawbridge has been lifted up. I mean, democratization used to have such a substantive sense of public investment so that your opportunities weren't totally a total rando going superstar globally famous in an instant because of some, ad hoc on the street mic interview, or total dead end anonymity working in a mattress spring factory, and your charms, go no further than that. I just think it's so, we gotta pause and just think about how utterly sad that that's where democracy has ended up in the lived experience of a lot of Americans in 2024.
Yeah, Steve, I think you just said it quite well. I think maybe we're on the same page in terms of our feeling about the disjunction between a person being able to demonstrate Riz, which I only just realized in this conversation came from the word charisma. I've heard that word all year long without knowing.
Oh my God,
that
never
it was
change.
Part of charisma.
That's so sweet. That's your Hawk Tuah moment right there, Dana.
But the idea that by demonstrating Riz on camera, that a random person would be able to get their break and go out and make something and, create a life for themselves that was different than came before. That is an interesting moment of making the gate easier to scale. And I'm all for that. But then I think, Stephen, this goes to what you were saying about the horrible hand that has been dealt to young people for the last few generations, really. What are you left with? What are your choices for what to do with that virality and that attention after you get it? It seems more and more, whether because of the narrowness of vision of the actual person making those choices or the narrowness of vision of the economy that they have now been unleashed onto, right, to try to create something, has just narrowed down to such a depressing and, to Julia's word, nihilistic point that I can't feel good about all this. I'm trying to find some generous part of myself that can say, hey, this isn't good or bad. It's just different from what came before. But it seems to me, and again, this may have to do with the fact that we're in this moment about to enter into the second Trump administration. It seems pretty bad.
And it's happening, I'll just add very quickly, it's happening as the gatekeeping world is collapsing. If those two things weren't happening at the same time, it would be less depressing.
Yeah, well, and then it raises the question, are the are the charismatic communicators who espouse values that you would find more valuable or less nihilistic, sort of sadly still pledging fealty to the dying gatekeepers instead of just going out and trying to make their own viral moments and launch their own podcast with Jake Paul. Probably not with Jake Paul. It's not where we want those people to go. But maybe I'm doing my dim bulb optimist thing here. But I just, after thinking that the Hawk Tuah girl was not for me, she isn't for me, but I don't necessarily think it's bad that she's able to find her people. And I also think the fluidity, the relationship of the people who have found her and are like, she's my thing, I love her. The whoever is still listening now that it's out of the Spotify top 100, but probably in the Spotify top 200 or 500, right? It still ranks, I think, on one of their comedy lists. I was like poking around to see where it is. It's still in the top 100 or 200 of various sublists of the platforms, which still means it's a huge show, right? So the classical gatekeepers often did not make people in various corners of our culture feel represented or heard or seen, and figuring out how to reach more people, I don't know. To me, it seems more like an interesting set of opportunities and an interesting problem set than the end of everything. So on that hopeful note, we will conclude this discussion of the Year of the Creator. Who knows what next year will be the year of? But the article we were discussing is Kyle Chayka's The Year Creators Took Over in The New Yorker, and of course the Talk Tuah Girl podcast by Haliey Welch.
Since 1981, Justin has been producing world-class Bordeaux-style wines from Paso Robles on California's Central Coast. As the pioneer of Paso, Justin wines are what put Paso Robles on the winemaking map. With a rich history of accolades, Justin produces exceptional wines and is proud to be America's #1 luxury Cabernet. Justin Wine was nice enough to send me a couple of sample bottles earlier this year, and they were both delicious. My favorite was called Isosceles. Justin didn't quiz me about my wine preferences or anything, but somehow they nailed exactly the way I like a red wine to taste, which I guess is Bordeaux style, I now know. Anyway, Isosceles was a really nice wine, and I would happily drink it again. Enjoy exceptional wine all season long with Justin. Whether it's for seasonal celebrations, festive dinner parties, or gift exchanges, Justin Wine is sure to make your holidays memorable. Pick up Justin Wine today at a store near you, or visit justinwine.com and enter Gabfest20 for 20% off your order. Justin offers the perfect holiday gifts for clients, colleagues, friends, or family. Be sure to check them out at justinwine.com to receive 20% off your order for a limited time. It's the time in the show when we discuss the business. This week, we have just 2 business items. First of all, submissions have closed for our annual call-in show. We got lots and lots of responses. After a little bit of a lag time, we suddenly got this flood of responses, more than we can possibly answer on the call-in show. But thanks so much to everyone who submitted questions. We're choosing now. We got so many good queries that we're trying to narrow them down. We can't wait to dig into some of these questions on our call-in special. Next week, the week of Christmas Day, there will not be a new episode in the feed, but on New Year's Day, you will hear our call-in special. So please tune in for that. Our only other item is to tell you about our Slate Plus bonus episode today. We're going to talk about, at Julia's behest, our past efforts in drama as students, as kids at summer camp, as high schoolers, as kids at camp. Just about every young person has opportunities and or compulsory moments where they must appear in plays, give speeches, play characters in pageants, perform in talent shows, etc. We thought we would talk about our own past as juvenile performers. If you're a Slate Plus member, you will hear that at the end of the show. And if you're not a Slate Plus member, you can sign up at slate.com/cultureplus. In exchange for your membership dollars, you get ad-free podcasts. You get bonus content like the segment I just described, which plenty of other Slate shows have too. And best of all, you get unlimited access to all of the writing and all of the podcasting on slate.com. When you're a member, you support our work and you support the work of our colleagues. So please, if you can, sign up today at slate.com/cultureplus. You can also subscribe on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. All right, back to the show.
All right, now is the moment where we endorse, but I'm going to call an audible here. Prior to recording today, Steve dropped his theory that these 3 topics were so linked and had so much to say to one another, which caused both me and Dana to go, huh? And I thought perhaps organically this connection would emerge. And maybe I see the glimmers of it in teens on their phones, which is a thing that is a through line. But Steve, what is the grand unifying theory of these three topics before we endorse? Go.
Well, I think the theocratic autocracy of Iran and the decadent nihilism of, America in 2024 make them mirror societies to one another. I mean, you couldn't have two more antipodally positioned topics in a way, and they're each different ways in which a society begins to strangle itself, basically. And in between, there's this highly comforting vision of a male human being who has realized himself in some healthy, interesting, stable way that is, anomalous. It's about, the attempt to achieve personal dignity in a meaningful way. And so I thought the position between these two extremes was this highly idealized and no doubt gendered. I mean, he's a white male, privileged white male, highly educated, privileged white male in his late 70s. But at least it was some vision of a world in which neither, top-down panoptical authoritarianism nor decadent grab-the-bag nihilism was dominant.
Well, it's so interesting. And it comes back around to the title of The Seed of the Sacred Fig. So there's some titles at the beginning of the film that explain that the sacred fig is this plant where the seeds land on branches and shoot down aerial roots and eventually strangle whatever the host tree is. And I think one of the questions that you're left with when watching the film is who's the host tree and who's the sacred fig? Is the vibrancy and innate morality of the daughters strangling the theocracy in their unwillingness to be compromised? Or is the corruption of the theocracy strangling the tree of possible human connection and a life like Ted Danson's? And who can say who's the fig and who's the host tree in this? All right. I like it. I'll buy it. I take it. Dana, please endorse.
All right. Well, since you ended our Hawk Tuah segment by recommending that Kyle Chayka piece that inspired us to talk about it in the first place, I'm going to jump off of that to talk about the Defector piece, recommend not just that, but the website that it came from. So I will also put on our show page this piece memorably entitled "The Hawk Tuah Meme Coin Rug Pull is the Apotheosis of Bag Culture" by Patrick Redford, which I thought was just beautifully written and said much better than I stammeringly did what I was thinking and trying to say about that phenomenon. But also I will jump from there to just endorsing Defector. I mean, I never would have thought that I would pay money to subscribe to a sports website, but Defector is this great employee-owned site that's sort of a spin-off of Deadspin. It has a lot of former Deadspin writers that helped to start it and write for it. I don't necessarily read the sports. I occasionally do if it overlaps with culture in some way that's interesting, but Defector also has just great writing about culture and politics. It has the incomparable David Roth, I think the best analyst of Trump out there. It's got Drew Magari, who's a very funny columnist as well. And I've just gotten to really like it. I'll often just wonder if Defector is talking about this or that, surprising new cultural development. And more often than not, there is something smart about it on there. So yeah, if you are looking to diversify your media consumption and get away from some of the big mainstream sites, subscribe to Defector. It's really worth supporting.
All right. Steve, what you got?
I found another little offering of solo piano music to drop on your welcome mat. So I think we all know to appropriately venerate the pianist Brad Mehldau, who I think dominantly plays jazz, but he's a virtuoso across all kinds of piano musicianship, plays classical. He did an album of, it's the kind of thing I think almost always from the get-go fails. He did an album of Beatles covers. It was totally inspired. It was like he took the melodic and basic melodic line, totally familiar, obviously overly familiar melodic lines, introduced new harmonics around and behind them, and while never once straying from the original spirit of the song, opened up these chambers upon chambers, unexpected chambers of musical possibility within them. I endorsed that already. I only just discovered that he made not one but two albums inspired by Bach, and they're so wonderful. After Bach, which came out in 2018. He made a sequel album to that whose title is very similar. We'll find it and post it. They're really beautiful. I mean, some of the pieces are simply him playing Bach pieces, which he plays beautifully. Some of them are just contemplative pieces inspired by Bach. It's a beautiful couple of albums, really infallible. I recommend it to you, Julia, in particular. Dana, I'm sure you'd love it too. And any of our listeners. Meldau's a genius. He really is.
I'm so excited to check that out. I definitely shall. All right. I'm going to break format today, endorsement-wise, and issue, and here we could put like a trumpet fanfare if we want, the first ever rewind endorsement of the Slate Culture Gabfest. It was inspired by a question we got from listener Michael, and we've been going through the questions in anticipation of our call-in show, which we're recording later this week, and which will reach your ears, I think, on New Year's Day. But listener Michael said, before getting into my question, I have to make my one little note that I still will go back and listen to Julia riff on the clapper, which is one of her endorses at least 5 years ago at this point. But that riff is genuinely one of the funniest things I've ever heard. I cannot speak to how funny the riff was, but I can tell you that if you have a Christmas tree in your home and you are still turning it on by bending over and like going behind a tree and getting sap on your back and shaking little ornaments off and getting little pine needles all over the ground and pulling a plug in and out of the wall, you are missing out. You should purchase the clapper and turn on your tree, delighting your friends and family with 2 loud claps. I first endorsed this 5 years ago, and in honor of Michael, we will rerun that clip, which I think captures my sense of delight and discovery. It has not abated 5 years later. There's still time. You're listening to this on Wednesday, the 18th. Click yourself up a clapper before it's too late. So we were all kids. And I remember watching those ads as a child and just being like, whoa, like the height of technology, the height of indolence and luxury. Like
it is kind of telekinesis, really.
Yeah, no, it felt like magic, like bending spoons with your mind. And of course, I was not raised in a home where you were going to get the clapper. I had no idea how much it cost. I thought it was like a hundreds of dollar piece of equipment because you couldn't just freaking talk to your phone and tell it to Google something for you, in 1990, whatever the hell I was seeing that ad. So anyway, the clapper, guess how much the clapper costs?
$4.
$19.99. Very affordable addition to the old Christmas retinue now that we're setting up a West Coast kit. Plugged my Christmas tree into the clapper. Guess how we turn on the Christmas tree lights?
I gotta say that is genius. I mean, that is genius.
Wait, so the clapper is not a light in itself? It's a thing that you can channel any light through?
You can put anything electric through. You could put your fucking blender on the clapper.
Oh my God, the clapper is a concept I need.
Dana, you left $1 billion. You left $1 billion on the table when you didn't go to Silicon Valley. That's all I'm gonna say.
I thought it was an individual light that you clapped on and off. Wow. The Peloton guy should hear about this. He could get his wife a clapper instead.
You could probably put the Peloton on the clapper and then he could clap her routines in time. Anyway,
could you put the Peloton wife on the clapper?
That was part of what it seemed like you might be able to do. But oof. It's the greatest. I'm the best. I win the clapper. Well, thank you so much, Steve and Dana, for this week's show.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.
Thanks, Julia.
You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page at slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory theme music is by the composer Nicholas Patel. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. Our producer is Jared Downing. For Steve Metcalf and Dana Stevens, I'm Julia Turner. Thanks for being with us.
When you're part of a military family, you understand sacrifice and support. At American Public University, we honor your dedication by extending our military tuition savings to your extended family. Parents, spouses, legal partners, siblings, and dependents all qualify for APU's preferred military rate of just $250 per credit hour for undergraduate and master's level programs. American Public University, Value for the whole family. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.